Hey, this is Dan from Bible Prophecy and Truth, and this is part 21 of the series on understanding the book of Revelation and the timeline of events. And I'm going to wrap it up today with Revelation 21 and 22, and then go through the complete timeline at the end to hopefully paint the big picture for you and establish it so that you can see the whole timeline, how it all flows together, how it all ends at the same place, and all of the events in the order that they happen according to scriptures. So, some notes on the final events that we've had the 1,000-year reign, and Jesus returned at the day of the Lord, at the end of all things, after the rapture, the wrath of God, and then Jesus touches down and destroys Rome and begins the 1,000-year reign. And then, as the devil was locked away, and then we have him released, and the day of judgment, the devil's destroyed, the Antichrist and false prophet are destroyed before the 1,000 years, and then we begin the new eternity with God. And this is what it's all about. I mean, this is what God's plan was from the very beginning when he created all things. It was based on his envisionment of a human being, right? The imagination of a human being that God had in his mind when he created everything. When he created the heavens and the earth, it was based on that blueprint, basically, of that will support human life. And that was his plan from the very beginning, was to become a man and part of his own creation, and then live with us forever. And that's what we see here in Revelation 21. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And the sea here is not an ocean. It's the same sea that we see in Revelation 7 and other places, where it's the sea of creation. It's a visual. It's like a symbolic representation of creation itself and all things in the physical realm. And so it's not a sea per se, or an ocean. It's a visual, or some kind of a symbolic reference to the creation itself. So God's going to recreate heaven and earth, and that's going to be it. That's going to be it forever. And we're going to live with God. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, come down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And that's what's so amazing about all of this, is God's plan is perfect, and he's done everything up to this point so that he could get a people for himself, a people that love him and will love him into eternity, so that he can be a man among them and dwell with them and be our God, and be with us forever. And that was his whole purpose. And Jesus, the man Jesus, is who will dwell and walk and talk with us, because that's God. It's the human body that God made for himself when he became a man, being born into his own creation. It's absolutely amazing how God did that. And we can't even comprehend the way he did it, how he did it, but it's a fact that he became a man in Jesus Christ. And that's who will be dwelling with us forever, is Jesus Christ, God in the flesh. And that's what I've got it highlighted here, because he's going to dwell with us. God himself is going to dwell with us forever. And he's going to wipe away all our tears. There's going to be no more death, nor sorrow, or crying, no more pain. It's going to be heaven. A new heaven and a new earth. And he's going to recreate all things. We're going to have a brand new universe to explore, I'm sure. And then I've highlighted verse 7 here because it's important to understand. Remember in verse or chapters 2 and 3, when we looked at the letters to the 7 churches and how it was full of warnings to Christians to overcome and to eliminate the sin out of their lives and to do what Jesus tells them to do in those letters. And we see the same thing here in the end, where it says, "He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son." And that's, we have to remember that the watered down churchianity of the church today is so apostate. It's crazy. We need to dig into the Word, read it and believe everything that Jesus says and everything that's in the Bible, and take it to heart and just obey. And then we will be one of these people. We need to overcome our flesh, our sin, all of that, and allow God to do that for us with His Holy Spirit. If we love God and we turn to Him and give Him our life, and just dwell on Him for the rest of our life, then He will take care of us and He will save us. So I had to highlight that because it's so important. I mean, that is the most important thing out of this whole study. If you take nothing away but the letters to the churches and the warnings here and what Jesus says that we have to overcome, then I've accomplished the greatest thing that I could, and that's to help you understand that we have to overcome. It's absolutely necessary. And then it talks about the New Jerusalem. It says, there's another thing to note here. It is done. This is the end. It's the end of God's plan and the beginning of the long plan, right? The end goal was to end this particular part of the plan, a mere 7,000 years, and then go into eternity with God, into bliss, and it'll be a Garden of Eden forever. It's going to be completely, we can't even understand how wonderful it's going to be. And I've got some verses I'm going to show you where God actually says that. We can't even comprehend what He has prepared for us. It's going to be so wonderful. And then we see that the New Jerusalem is kind of explained with precious stones, and it's kind of a box is what it shows us here. The city is 4 square. It has the same breadth, height, and length. So it's like a square that it's depicting here. But the New Jerusalem is not really a city or a building. Like, it's not a square. It's the 12 gates are the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. And the wall of the city has 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The foundations of the city are the apostles, and the gates are the 12 tribes. It's a symbolic picture of the New Jerusalem, which is where God will dwell among His people. And so I don't believe that there's really a physical square that we're looking at here, that it's just a symbolic representation of the city, which will be God's dwelling, and the area where it'll be our home base, basically, where we will live with God in the new universe. So it like I said, I don't really believe that it's a box. It's just a symbolic representation of that, of where we will live with God. And like here too, it's the street of the city was pure gold, as it were, transparent glass. It's like we've seen before in previous chapters, like chapter 4 and I think it's chapter 16 or 15. I don't remember which one, where it has a couple of different places where it has this like a transparent floor, where like a fiery, just amazing. It's like, how do you explain something? How do you draw a picture of something that you can't really relate to anything else? And so that's why I'm sure it's like the street of the city was pure gold, as it were transparent glass. It was the best way John could explain what he saw. It's just some amazing visualization of the dwelling of God in eternity. And then I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it, right? Because God himself is going to be there. There's no need for a temple. And the sea had no need of the sun, neither of the moon, nor to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it. And the Lamb is the light thereof. Jesus is going to be the light of everything. And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. And there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination or maketh a lie, but they that are written in the Lamb's book of life. This again is it's a symbolic representation of the same thing we saw in the previous chapter, where all those that are not written in the book of life are going to be cast into the lake of fire. And so it's only going to be those who love God, who are saved, and who are going to be here in the future with God. And then chapter 22, he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. And in the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. But there shall be no more curse. But the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him. And they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads. And there shall be no night there, and they need no candle, neither light of the sun, for the Lord God giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. And we don't know what's coming in this last in eternity with God, but like I said, I'm gonna show you some scriptures. I'll just do it right now, where God tells us, like 1 Corinthians 2:9. It is written, "And eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him." And that's, Matthew 7:11. If ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to them that ask him? And the kingdom of heaven is like unto a treasure hid in a field, which when a man hath found, he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all he has, and buys that field. And again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchantman seeking good pearls, who when he found one pearl of great price, he went and sold everything he had and bought it. I mean, that's the kingdom of heaven is going to be something that we can't even imagine. It's going to be so wonderful. It's going to be so awesome that we can't even imagine it in our minds today. It's going to be the most amazing thing, and there's going to be no sorrow. There's going to be no pain. It's going to be so wonderful. And then just to note, in Isaiah 65, we see the same description of new heavens and a new earth, the same representation that we see here in Revelation. And you can study that. And a couple other notes before we end this and start on the timeline. Jesus says, "The Spirit and the bride say, Come, and let him that heareth say, Come, and let him that is athirst come, and whosoever will, let him take of the water of life freely." This is what it's going to be like with him in eternity. And then a warning here, and it's very important that we understand this warning. It's very important that we don't try to add to or take away from the prophecies of Revelation and what's said here, and try to make things other than what is actually written. And it's a very stern warning. Every man that heareth the words of this prophecy of this book, if any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book. And if any man shall take away from the words of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life and of the holy city and from the things which are written in this book. So it's really important to just believe what the Bible says and believe what it says here in Revelation and not try to add to it or take away from it and try to make it into something that you want it to be or what other people say it is. We just need to read it and believe it and understand it as God gives us the understanding and not try to make it into something else. Or this is a very stern warning that we could actually, God may take our part out of the book of life, which means you would not be saved. So it's very, very stern warning. We need to be very careful that we don't try to add or take away from it. And just believe what it says for what it says and not try to twist it or anything. So I'm not going to read the entire 2 chapters. I like I said in the very beginning, this is not a guide to give you a total understanding. It's a guide to help you as you read and study yourself, and just a guide to show you other scriptures and a guide to show you different places and how to read it and how it all ties together at the end. So my expectation is that you're going to be reading and studying on your own, and this is just something to help you to get started in that. So the end of all things with God is the end of the book, and it's basically, it's not the end, it's the beginning, because this whole plan, this whole part of God's plan is just the beginning to get himself a people and to go into eternity with and to live with forever. And it's going to be awesome. It's worth anything that we have to sacrifice in this life to shed our flesh and our earthly desires and just put all that away and just give it all to God, because there's going to be so much more in heaven than we could ever have on this earth. It's not even worth it. So that's the end. I think I've given you all the notes that I wanted to discuss about those. So let's just jump into the timeline now, and I'm going to go through the timeline in as much detail as possible without getting too long, but to go through it point by point so we can put it all together for everything that we've studied and see in prophecy, and see how it all lines up and how it all happens and what order and how it all ends and how everything all ties together to the last day. So as we've seen, it's very likely that the seals have been broken for 1700 years. Since 325 AD, but the first seal is almost certainly Catholicism. The second, communism. The third, capitalism. The fourth, Islam. When you study those seals and the spirits from Zechariah, how they are parallel prophecies and show us that they're really just spirits that are in the world that have been working for quite some time and have brought the world to the state that it is today. And like I said, I'll never say anything is absolute certainty, but I'm sure in my mind that those seals have been broken, the first 4, and that we're in the time of the 5th seal now. That's what I firmly believe. But like I said, I'm not going to say it's so, because until all things come to pass, we won't know for sure. It could be something else entirely that we just haven't seen yet. I don't think so, but I have to make that statement. So, but then we have the first 4 trumpets. The first 5, actually, but the first 4, because I really believe that if the first 3 trumpets have blown, we're probably in the time frame of the 4th trumpet today, which could very well be like God speeding up time and just kind of accelerating events so that it all comes to a conclusion before we destroy ourselves, which is what Jesus said, that if the days weren't shortened, and by that he means that they were shortened from the beginning, not later, but from the beginning it was decided by God that they were going to be shortened and cut off at this point in time was going to be the end. If the days weren't shortened, that there would be no flesh saved, is what Jesus said. And probably because we would destroy ourselves. That's what I imagine. And so we're very likely, we've seen the first three trumpets. We're in the time frame of the fourth trumpet, and we're waiting for the fifth trumpet, which will be this creature that comes when the bottomless pit's opened and smoke comes out of the pit and these creatures come out, that most likely the world is going to say are some kind of aliens. I mean, that's what I imagine, because Satan has set it up for people to believe in aliens, and these creatures are some kind of an alien thing from the description of it in the fifth trumpet. So I'm almost certain that the world and Satan is going to try to say, well, these are aliens, and they're going to try to pull everyone away from the truth, which is that it's the fifth trumpet blowing and a warning from God. Because remember, the fifth, sixth, and seventh trumpets are the three woes. These are going to be worldwide catastrophic events that nobody will miss. And it's going to be God saying, no, now is the time. It's the three woes. It's this very strong message from God. And so I believe this is where we are today. We're waiting for the fifth trumpet, which will lead into the sixth trumpet, and then the final seventh trumpet. But the confirmation of the covenant is going to happen somewhere in here. We don't know exactly which comes first. We don't know if the confirmation of the covenant comes before or after the fifth and sixth trumpets, because the sixth trumpet war is going to kill 2 billion people, remember. And when that happens, I can see how that would be a perfect stepping stone for the Antichrist to take power. When the world is trembling in fear because a nuclear war just happened and killed 2 billion people, and we're going to be clamoring for peace, and it tells us that the Antichrist comes in the name of peace, and just by peace will destroy many and take over the world, and that premise. So it's, in my mind, I see how this could play out, with the sixth trumpet being the stepping stone for the Antichrist to take power. Now, it could happen in the first half of that final seventh week, the final 7 years. So the confirmation of the covenant could come first, and then we see the fifth and sixth trumpets. And the fifth trumpet may even coincide with remember where the Antichrist stands up, and it's 2,300 days before the last day. So it's about 8 months after the signing of the covenant. So the 7 years will be marked at the confirmation of the covenant, and then about 8 months later is we're going to see the Antichrist stand up and begin gathering power. And that's what it might coincide with the fifth trumpet, when the bottomless pit is opened, because that's when, Satan is not cast to the earth until the midst of the final 7 years. It's 3.5 year mark. But when the pit is opened, we know that the beast comes out of that pit, because it tells us later in Revelation that it's the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit. So it very well could be that fifth trumpet coincides with when the Antichrist stands up and begins gathering power. Maybe that's when he sells his soul to the devil. And then at the midst of the week, at the abomination of desolation, is when he's actually going to sit in the temple claiming to be God. But he may have already been possessed by Satan for a while. Satan may just use him for a while to gather that power and gather the kings of the earth to get behind him, and claim to be the Muslim Mahdi, and get the 10 Arab nations to get behind him, and then make a league with the European nations and Russia, and create that military and political power base. It's going to take him a little while to do all that. And the Bible also shows us that he's going to be at war for most of his reign, where he's going to take over the world and he's going to rule the world, but there's still going to be holdouts, because the Bible shows us that he's going to be fighting wars the whole time. So there's still going to be nations that don't align with him, but he's going to have a power base that can't be matched, and he's going to rule the known world and rule that area. Remember the area, if you watched my Prophecy in the Present Time videos, that area that that is the known world. That's the area of prophetic implication, where that's where God chose to put his name in Jerusalem, and so everything is centered around that. So the Antichrist is going to rule the world. He's going to rule the Middle East and Europe, and that's really the area of prophecy. And the rest of the world, he is going to rule the world, and all are going to be fooled by the miracles performed and all that. So, but the wars he's going to be fighting, the holdouts are probably going to be outside of that area. It's just my imagination of how that all plays out. But he is going to rule the world, is what it tells us. But he's also going to be fighting wars. So there's going to be some nations that are holding out, and he has to conquer them militarily. So we're at this state now where we're waiting for the confirmation of the covenant or the fifth trumpet. And we're so close to prophetic fulfillment now, especially when you look at, if you look at the timeline, and I have a couple other web pages on my site. There's one that's right now, what's going on right now in biblical prophecy. And then there's another one where I talk about when is the end, and it's on my home page. And there's a big picture right here which you can click on, and it goes to when is the end of the world according to Jesus, and it goes through all the timelines, that everything that he prophesied would herald his coming, and all the timelines of everything from how long the world has been in existence, and everything else that pertains to all of this. And that's what shows us that the world is really 6,000 years old. There's several reasons for knowing that. Biblical timelines of the when so and so begat so and how old they were, and all of the things that have happened. It's from Adam to Abraham was about 2,000 years, and then from Abraham to Jesus was about 2,000 years, and from Jesus to now is about 2,000 years. And that's the first 6,000 years of God's plan. And then the final 1,000 years is going to be that seventh part of that plan of God. It's a 7-part millennial, 7 millennials, basically 7,000 years, a week of millenniums that God has planned for this part of his grand plan to get a people for himself. And I know I'm going way too fast and not really giving you much detail on that, but definitely go look at those other pages and look at the timeline that and all the different information that I give you on those other web pages, and definitely study up. It's very, very interesting. But so the place we're at right now, as we're waiting for these events. It's likely the first 4 seals have broken, and we're in the 5th seal, and the first 3 trumpets have blown, and we're in the 4th trumpet, and we're waiting on the confirmation of the covenant, which when that happens, then the Antichrist, remember, is going to begin gaining power to take over the world. And then Jerusalem's going to be compassed with armies, and the desolation is nigh, is what it shows us in Luke 21. And what I believe that to be is that when they signed that peace treaty, if you know anything about world events right now, Palestine is the one that's really not going to agree to a peace treaty. The other Arab nations are coming on board right now. We've got several of them, and several more in the wings that are coming in. And so it looks like that roadblock for the Arab nations has been broken, and they're starting to come on board with the peace treaties. The UN, I just read, the UN is holding out. They don't really want to agree that it's possible for it to happen at this point. And so when all that happens, when we actually have the signing of the confirmation of the covenant, which will be a 7-year peace agreement, the UN and everybody else is going to be involved in that, and that's going to be the many that the Antichrist is with signing that agreement. And so when all of that happens, and we have the UN and everybody, and they actually sign this agreement, that's when we're going to know that there's 7 years left. That's going to be the confirmation of the covenant. And then we're going to see Jerusalem compassed with armies, because it's very likely going to be that the Palestinians will refuse to be part of this, and it'll be forced on them. So Jerusalem being compassed with armies could very well be armies of the United Nations going in to force peace, to keep the Palestinians from attacking and lobbing missiles at Israel like they do constantly. And so it could be compassed with armies so that the peace will be kept. And it'll be a peacekeeping force, not necessarily an attacking force. So that's what I believe that means in Luke. And then, like I said, we're going to see the fifth and sixth trumpets. We don't really know for sure if it's going to happen before the confirmation of the covenant or not. But it's almost certainly going to happen before the abomination of desolation, because remember, we see in Revelation 17 that it's the same beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit who gains the power of the 10 kings. So it's got to be before that, because remember, the bottomless pit is opened at the fifth trumpet. So when the Antichrist sits in the temple claiming to be God, he's going to be possessed by this beast, which is Satan, or most certainly, he's going to be in league with him at least. If he's not possessed, he's definitely going to be in league with him, because remember, he's going to be getting his power from Revelation 13. We saw where the Antichrist gets his power from Satan. And we see that it's the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit that kills the two witnesses at the end of the tribulation, and we see that with all the events that we've seen, it almost has to happen before the abomination of desolation. When the Antichrist sits in the temple claiming to be God, the fifth trumpet has almost certainly had to have opened or blown before that, when the bottomless pit will be opened. Based on all of the other things that we see about that, the bottomless pit and the beast that ascends out of it, which is Satan. So, and the same thing with the sixth trumpet. It's almost certainly going to come before the confirmation of the covenant. We don't know that certainly for sure, but it seems logical, based on everything else we know about prophecy and what happens with the Antichrist coming in the name of peace, is that he's going to use that as a stepping stone to step up into power and by peace take over the world, because the world will be clamoring for a savior at that point. So I really believe that it doesn't have to, but I'm certain in my mind it's going to happen before the abomination of desolation, but not necessarily before the confirmation of the covenant. We don't know which will come first. And then the 144,000 also are sealed before the abomination of desolation, because they're sealed at the same time as or they're not sealed at the same time, but we see that they are spoken of at the fifth trumpet. So they had to have been sealed prior to that. So there's a lot of reasons for believing that. And it's one of those gray areas where we don't really know the exact timing, but we can see from other scriptures that refer to things that happen in those events in other places, that show us that it's probably going to be before the abomination of desolation, almost certainly. And I'm not sure about the confirmation of the covenant, like I said. So it could be how the Antichrist takes power. It could be a relatively new event, or it could be something that actually prompts it could prompt the signing of that peace treaty if there's a war, and it's based on that conflict in the Middle East. Then they could say, no, we're not going to let this happen again. 2 billion people just died, and it's going to force the world into signing the peace treaty. It could be that too. So we're not really sure whether it's going to come first or the confirmation comes first, but almost certainly it's going to come before the Antichrist sits in the temple claiming to be God and takes over the world. And during this time too, we're also going to see the temple rebuilt. Once the confirmation of the covenant is signed and the Jews have established their state in the area, and the borders of Israel are drawn, and they're going to establish the status of East and West Jerusalem, and they're going to establish the status of the Temple Mount. And we know that the temple is going to be rebuilt. And like I showed you in, I believe it was part 11, I showed you the pictures of the Temple Mount and the Dome of the Spirits, and how there's room there to build the temple. And I know that they're already building the parts and getting everything ready off-site, so that when they have permission, as soon as this confirmation is signed and they have that ability and they're given permission to build, they're going to build that temple in no time, and it's going to be erected, and they're going to begin sacrifices again on the altar. And that's what the Antichrist, when he sits in the temple claiming to be God at the abomination of desolation, he's going to cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. He's going to stop them from doing that at that point. And also during this time, during this first 3.5 years, when the temple's rebuilt, the Antichrist and false prophet are going to be working together, executing their plans to take over the world. And then when the Antichrist sits in the temple claiming to be God, that's when the false prophet will also have the power of Satan to do miracles like pulling fire from the sky, and he's going to cause the world to worship the Antichrist through those miracles, by means of those miracles. It's going to seem to the world as if he is a godly man using God's power to do these things. But as we see in Revelation 13, it's going to be the power of Satan that is giving him that ability. So, and then the final 3.5 years begins, where the Antichrist sits in the temple claiming to be God, stops the sacrifice and oblation, and basically is going to break that peace agreement, and he's going to take over the world and grab all that power for himself. And we know at that same time is when the devil is cast to the earth having great wrath. And we see Daniel 12's time of trouble begin. Matthew 24's tribulation, the great tribulation, will begin at that point in time. And we also know that Israel will be protected for that 3.5 years from Satan, because God's not going to let it be overrun. And when the Antichrist, at the end of those 3.5 years, when he comes with his armies through Megiddo and comes from the north to come in and wipe out Israel, that's when God stops it all and takes over the world. And also during that last 3.5 years, we're going to have the two witnesses that will be prophesying for that last 1260 days. It's like the counterbalance that God has for the false prophet and the Antichrist. Well, God has his two witnesses as kind of a counterbalance to that. And so the Antichrist's reigns for 3.5 years. We know that absolutely. It tells us he's given power for 42 months. And he causes craft to prosper. Now, that word craft doesn't necessarily mean witchcraft. It means iniquity. It means sin. And he's going to cause that to cause sin to prosper and be in abundance. And he's going to implement the mark of the beast, which we talked about, which will probably be an RFID chip or RFID tattoo ink that they use to mark us. And nobody will be able to buy or sell or have a job or a bank account or anything unless you comply. And it's going to take him time to do that, right? There's still going to be billions of people on the earth at that point, and it's going to take a lot of time to put a chip in everybody. So the first couple of years, it's all going to be happening, and it's only going to be at the very end where it's going to be where everyone has the chip. Because it's going to take, how long is it going to take to put a chip in billions of people? A long time. So there's going to be a period of time there where not everybody has the chip, but it's going to be required. And then at the end of that, the Antichrist kills the two witnesses. And then, as we saw, they lie dead in the street of Jerusalem for 3.5 days. And then they're raised. And the world is scared to death when that happens. And then God takes them up to heaven. And like I said, I believe that's the same timing as the rapture. At that point in time where he appears in the sky and takes us to be with him, and then begins pouring out his wrath, which is we see the last warning in Revelation 14, the angel in the midst of heaven shouting the warnings, and then Jesus returns in the clouds and reaps his own, which is the rapture. And then we see the Battle of Armageddon, which is the end of the wrath of God, and the 7 vials being poured out, where when at the end of that is when Jesus touches down on the Mount of Olives and treads the winepress of the wrath of God, and the earthquake splits the Mount of Olives and destroys Rome. And all of the events, the 6th seal, 7th vial, 7th trumpet, Ezekiel 38, and Matthew 24, we see that immediately after the tribulation is when all of those events intersect. They're all going on. Everything's happening all at the same time, and then they all end at that same place, at that event. And then the Antichrist and false prophet are taken and thrown into the lake of fire. The devil is bound for that 1,000 years, and it is done. It's all over. And the kingdom of God, and the 1,000-year reign begins. And then after that, remember, Satan's going to be loose, and he's going to fool those that don't love God, and he's going to try to go and wipe out God and fight him. And then God just destroys them with fire, and then the devil himself is destroyed and thrown in the lake of fire. And then we have Judgment Day, where all of the dead are resurrected and judged. And when that's all over, God creates a new heaven and a new earth, and we begin eternity with him, where there's no more pain, no more sorrow. Everything is going to be perfect, and we can't even imagine how wonderful it's going to be. It's going to be so amazing to be with God forever. And so that's it. That's the end of it, and that's the goal, is to be with God in that last day, to be taken up to be with him and be able to spend eternity with him. The mighty, wonderful, loving, awesome God that created all things just for this purpose, to have a people that will love him, that he can dwell with forever and love. It's going to be, I can't even imagine. It's going to be so wonderful. So I hope this has helped. I hope this series has helped you to understand how to read Revelation, and to really get you studying it yourself, and just open your Bible and start reading it from cover to cover, and study the prophecies and study everything, and just believe what God says and obey him. So God bless you.